We got a side quest today. I keep hearing about this because apparently the anime community lost over 40
Out of the way, Tubby.
last year.
Pardon me, oldie Hawn.
Why, you ill-mannered sack of crap!
Oh, goody. Now I know whatever happened to baby Jane.
You are the...
Just look at this number for a second. 5.7 trillion yen. That is the official staggering estimate that Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry just dropped on the world. That is how much money they claim online piracy is bleeding away from Japanese digital media. But here is the head-scratching paradox. Anime, it has never been more profitable. The deeper question, the investigative question that we are answering today is, why has anime piracy successfully survived every single iteration of the legal market? Have to realize that this entire global empire wasn't started by high-tech hackers or internet syndicates. It was built by hand, by a group of fans in the 1970s using postage stamps and physical cassettes. The first stage of the machine was the tape culture. See, Japanese animators had actually been appearing on Western television for decades, but not usually as anime in the way we understand it now. The executives would take these shows and completely rename them. They would then dub them, heavily edit them, completely rework them.
Defender of the universe, a mighty robot, loved by good.
And then sold them as standard children's cartoons. Astro Boy, Speed Racer, Battle of the Planets, Voltron. Now, these were the entry points, and sure, they were great, but they weren't exactly a clean window into Japanese culture. They were more like a generic brand version of your favorite cereal. But the real fan distribution story, that begins in the 1970s. In 1977, a group of fans helped create the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, often described as America's first official anime club. Fans would screen rare Japanese animation, physically record the shows, copy the cassettes, and share them with other enthusiasts. Now, to be clear, this was not piracy in the modern lazy click on a dodgy streaming site sense. It was a much slower, smaller, and more physical way of handling it. And when I say physical, I mean actual physical. No app, no search bar, no link. People worked with what we call a SACE, meaning a self-addressed stamped envelope. You would mail blank tapes to someone that you probably found through a fan site, club list, or convention contact, and then you waited. I read stories from people who would say, I mailed 3 blank Maxell tapes and returned postage to some guy in Ohio. I just had to hope that he didn't keep them. 3 months later, the package came back with Sailor Moon episodes on it. That was the invisible deal. Trust a stranger, you could potentially lose a few tapes, or suddenly get access to the show that your country had never bothered to sell to you. The theme was hope and prayer, but it was still unauthorized copying. And this is where we hit the first massive, deeply uncomfortable realization for the industry. Researchers who studied this exact era of fan distribution between the 1976 and 1993 argue something wild. They say that this copyright infringement actually helped create the massive global demand that later made licensed anime commercially viable in the West.
Okay, what we're going to be showing here are the dirty pair plant salad style dubs.
How many of you have seen it?
Plant salad dubs.
Well, name them and see who's seen what.
Okay.
In plain blunt English, the fans were building the entire market before the multi-billion-dollar companies even realized that there was actually a market to exploit. Anime piracy did not begin because people refused to pay. It began because people were desperately trying to access something that the market was completely failing to give them. At first, a lot of these tapes were completely raw. No subtitles, no dub, just a raw Japanese audio and a room full of fans trying to work out what the hell was going on from the context, the vibes, and the one guy in the corner who knew just enough Japanese to become a temporary priest for the evening. Then came the translation notes. See, before burning subtitles became normal, fans used printed scripts or paper booklets. You would watch the tape and you literally read along. Brother, which sounds pretty insane now. Today, people act like Western civilization is collapsing if Netflix forgets where they...
So the first version of dub and sub was you actually having to have this script and reading it while you're watching. That would be crazy. Like, all right, let me look and see what it's supposed to say. What are the dialogues supposed to be? That's crazy.
Pause an episode for 12 seconds. I mean, seriously, pour some liquor for the true anime OG fans. I salute you guys. Back then, this kind of madness was standard fandom labor. If you wanted the culture badly enough, you accepted the total inconvenience as baseline entry fee. Eventually, fan subbing became the solution. Fans would translate the episodes, meticulously time the subtitles, burn those translation tracks directly onto physical copies of VHS tapes.
Was that you had to acquire an expensive piece of hardware called a genlock in order to synchronize the video signals from the Japanese laserdisc with the anime on it and your subtitles before recording it out to a VHS tape.
The equipment was incredibly expensive, the work was brutally slow, and the quality was often rough.
It was not in the movie theaters, it was not in television, but here we had Will with Arctic Animation producing subtitling, bringing the stuff from Japan, subtitling it so that we could actually understand what they're talking about.
But the result? It was powerful. Anime could now travel across borders with its meaning and soul fully attached. And that completely changed the game. Suddenly, a fan in America, Britain, Brazil could watch a piece of media that they had never been officially released in their country and actually understand it. And this is exactly where the old school fan sub ethic came from. A strict community code. You do not charge beyond costs, you do not profit, and you stop distributing the exact second that a show gets officially licensed. Now, did everyone follow that moral code perfectly? Of course not. People are people. Give them a moral code or, a dual deck VCR and somebody is eventually just going to break ranks. But at the time, that code mattered. It mattered because it shows how these fans understood what they were doing and why. Many of them didn't think of themselves as digital pirates. They thought of themselves as evangelists. And honestly, there's really a lot of truth to that. Yes, they were copying shows illegally, but they were also single-handedly spreading a culture to corners of the globe where official legal markets had barely even bothered to show up. And that is why this history is so incredibly messy. If it's not Robin Hood with subtitles, but it's also not pure theft, some might call it fan culture that was growing within a total commercial vacuum. But as the 1980s bled into the 1990s, this quiet community of underground evangelists would hit a massive physical wall. Because sharing a tape with 10 people in your local university club is one thing, but what happens when that community scales up to thousands of people across entire continents and physical degradation of the magnetic tape start destroying the footage entirely? The system developed a completely rotten, glitchy mechanism just to survive the physical limits of the analog world. By the time we hit the 1980s and 1990s, Anime Club became the real underground distribution network. Tapes moved through conventions, university clubs, postal swaps, classified lists, fan newsletters, and personal contacts. A fan would get a copy, make 5 more, send them out into the world, and then some of those copies would then be copied again. And look, each generation just made the next copy much worse.
The only option was to acquire these fan-subbed VHS tapes from a fan-sub group or copy a tape from someone else who had a fan-subbed version. The issue was that every time a VHS tape is re-recorded, the quality degrades a little.
By the time you got to the 5th iteration, the characters on screens looked like they were being viewed through a haunted toaster. And sometimes you had to fight the VCR itself. The tracking button was basically your life. Someone on Reddit said it best.
I had a copy of Akira so worn down that I had to sit next to the VCR and keep tapping the tracking just to stop the picture rolling.
One bad copy after another and the screen looked like it was melting. The struggle was real, people, but no one cared because fuzzy, unreadable anime was still infinitely better than no anime at all. And look, if you were in the UK in the 1990s, the whole thing was even more ridiculous. You could stay up until stupid o'clock in the morning, flipping through late night television channels, desperately hoping to catch an anime by complete accident. Half the time, you landed on Babe Station. Once in a while, I would get lucky and catch Akira or Fist of the North Star at 2 a.m. And if the broadcast gods felt especially nice to me that day, I would land on Legend of the Overfreed. I'm talking tentacles, gore, deep, sweet psychological childhood trauma. I have watched Legend of the Overfreed more times than I would ever admit in front of my own mother. Plus, there was absolutely no one around to explain why this cartoon had just declared full-scale war on my innocence.
The early 2000s, basically late 90s, late night anime when you can, staying up late. Gaiva, anime on Bravo when they used to do it, back on cable.
Western anime in the 90s wasn't some clean, organized tsunami block that people had access to. For a lot of people, it was pure blind luck. And that is important because it explains the deep emotional roots of modern piracy. A lot of fans back
in the 90s, that's when the old sci-fi channel used to come in handy, because after 10 o'clock, they'd have an anime block. But if you up after 10 o'clock, you already know what your problem is, right? Yeah, your parents are going to come in there and beat your ass because you're supposed to be asleep. Hey, if you ain't getting your ass beat, your parents, do they really even care? No.
Then didn't just begin out of a place of, I want free content. They began out of a place that I literally cannot find this thing anywhere. And when you build an entire global fandom that way, around scarcity, swapping archives, and hunting down forbidden things, those deep-rooted habits don't just magically disappear because a multi-billion-dollar company eventually decides to launch an app. People remember the old problem. They remember the feeling, the import prices, the butcher dubs, the months, sometimes years of waiting for an official release to hit your local shelf. So when the legal market finally steps into the room and says, trust us, we've got it now, don't worry about it, older fans just look at them with a side eye and think, have you though? By the time we hit the late 90s to early 2000s, fan distribution shifted from physical magnetic tapes straight into digital files. See, the internet didn't just cleanly jump from VHS tapes to torrents, and then straight to a slick browsing streaming site. It was a really chaotic migration. Files moved through Usenet, FTP servers, CDR burning circles, IRC chat channels, and automated XDCC download bots. Who remembers buying burnt Naruto CDs at their barbershop? I certainly do. I mean, I had a zip-up CD wallet full of anime, using a permanent marker to write the name of the anime on every disc. One disc would say Naruto 1 to 25, another one would say DBZ movies, and you just had to pray that this thing actually worked when you got home. These were also the golden times where you could actually buy bootleg anime DVDs from eBay.
I vividly remember having to buy Naruto CDs off eBay, get the subbed versions.
Then we had IRC, Internet Relay Chat for anyone who doesn't know. It was highly critical to the entire blueprint of the system. It was essentially old school text-only chat rooms with file-serving bots sitting like they were tiny digital warehouse managers. You joined a specific channel, you looked at the text-based pack list, manually typed out your request code for a file, and then you waited. Sometimes you waited a very long time. And IRC had its own ritual. You didn't just search like a normal person, you'd have to type the commands. MSG, bot name, XDCC, send #452. It's crazy. Then you sat in a queue, watched the number crawl down, and prayed that the bots didn't disconnect before it was your turn. Again, to anyone looking from the outside, it looked like absolute madness. But this was part of the process. None of it was seamless. Home dial-up and early broadband internet were also brutally slow. God help you if you were 6 hours into a 10-hour download of a 74 megabyte Dragon Ball Z movie, only for your mum or dad to call the house to see if you were okay, and then the internet got disconnected. Cheers, mum and dad, thanks for calling. Well, I'm certainly not okay now, as I wipe my salty tears away. And even if you were lucky to complete it, the battle wasn't finished. The suffering was never over at that point. See, this was the DivX and codec pack era. Now, DivX was one of the big names associated with compression video files. But if your computer didn't have the right codec, the file might as well have just been useless. A codec is basically a bit of software that tells your computer how to read the video. Now, some people would report, well, not just some people, myself included,
I waited 2 days for a movie to download, opened it, and all you would see is solid green screen. Audio was playing, but the video was gone. Then you would have to spend the rest of your evening or the next couple of days digging through forums, downloading K-Lite and Nimo codec packs, just trying to make the bloody thing work.
Half of the anime fandom accidentally became IT support networks because one episode refused to bloody play. But compared to mailing physical VHS back and forth across the country, it might as well have been Star Trek. The underground culture that had originally formed around physical clubs and tape swaps simply packed his bags and moved into the digital world. This is the missing rung in the history of media consumption. VHS clubs, then IRC chat servers, then BitTorrent. It wasn't one clean evolutionary jump. And at this point, the corporate rights holders had actually started paying attention. Media corporations were now already issuing mass takedown notices in the infancy of the web. Back in 2004, a major Japanese publisher called Media Factory sent sweeping cease and desist notices to underground fan subgroups and prominent tracking indexes, including a site name called Anisuki, which had now become the central public library for unlicensed digital releases. And that specific corporate pressure is exactly where the old school fan sub code started to completely fracture. The old rule of stop distributing when a show gets officially licensed made complete sense when your distribution was slow, physical, and localized. But it became structurally impossible to enforce when digital files could be replicated and copied globally in the matter of seconds. The internet fundamentally changed the scale of the game, and scale always changes the morals. A small local tape circle feels like you're sharing, but a global high-speed file sharing network looks like a ruthless market competitor. And this is the exact millisecond that the anime piracy transitioned from a labor of love into an existential threat that the multi-billion-dollar industries as a live threat to destroy. But the boardroom had no idea the next upgrade was coming. Torrents were about to turn anime piracy from a messy download hunt into a weekly global schedule. Then BitTorrent arrived and it made everything faster. Well, faster if your settings weren't a complete disaster. This was the uTorrent era. Green icons, yellow warning triangles, seeds, leechers, ratios. It literally felt like I had unlocked the broadband god mode. This is the exact layer of the onion where anime piracy became a weekly, global, and highly predictable pipeline. In the 2000s, tracker indexes like Tokyo Tosho and the legendary public giant called Naya turns the consumption of Japanese animation into a highly localized television schedule.
Around this time, this is kind of when torrenting was at its all-time high. So like between 2003 to like 2012, I was heavy on the torrents. Like I still have hard drives now with like bare anime, like Naruto stuff, Death Note.
And for the fans, this was no longer just about downloading a movie. It was also a cultural ritual. Thursday was Naruto Day. Friday was Bleach Day. Human beings across completely different countries and time zones were refreshing the exact same web pages at the exact same millisecond, waiting for the exact same episode file to drop, arguing about the exact same translation choices, and then heading into the community forums to behave like normal people for approximately 4 seconds before starting a massive flame war over Japanese honorifics. Underground fan subgroups became a full-blown, highly recognized global brand. We're talking Datebayo, Shinsen Subs, Eclipse, Luna. Depending on what you were watching, the specific group translating the show mattered almost as much as the animation itself. People had intense brand loyalty. They had enemies. Hashtag Team Datebayo. They had public opinions about font choices and subtitle stylings that would probably get them placed on the government watch list today. And the speed, that was the ultimate product. Official corporate releases, where they even bothered to exist, were notoriously slow. Retail DVDs came out months or years later. Niche shows were trapped in licensing limbos forever. Mainstream dubs were heavily edited and butchered for Western TV. And official imports were wildly expensive. The fan subs were rough around the edges, sure, but they were incredibly fast. And that speed completely re-engineered consumer expectations. Once a fan got used to watching an anime episode just hours after it aired on Japanese television, and then they were now being told by a company to wait 6 months for a physical DVD box set, that started to feel like a personal insult. See, the industry had spent decades training fans to wait. Piracy trained them never to wait again. This is one of the most critical structural shifts in the entire story. Piracy didn't just supply the product, it set the clock. And the multi-billion-dollar legal industry eventually had to respond to that exact clock, because they knew that their entire global audience had already crossed the street. But how do you respond to a competitor that is faster, completely free, and already commands the loyalty of your entire target market? Well, you do something completely radical. You stop fighting the pirates and you copy their entire business model. Which brings us to one of the strangest, most hypocritical characters in this entire investigation, Crunchyroll. Because Crunchyroll, it had sat comfortably on both sides of the battlefield. Back when it launched in 2006, Crunchyroll wasn't some pristine corporate entity. It was an explicitly 100% illegal user-uploaded video streaming site packed with absolute brim of unauthorized, unlicensed anime cards and its massive pirate hub. It operated so efficiently that in the early 2008, a prominent venture capital firm called Venrock handed them a $4 million check in funding. This move absolutely enraged the traditional anime industry. Because a mainstream American investment firm had just poured millions into a platform built entirely on structural copyright infringement. And then came the pivot. Between 2008 and 2009, Crunchyroll decided to go clean. They started negotiating official legal streaming deals with Japanese production committees. The ultimate turning point was a deal for Naruto Shippuden. TV Tokyo and Studio Period partnered directly with the platform to simulcast the show legally. This historic deal took place on January the 8th, 2009, starting with the Naruto Shippuden episode 91. For the first time ever, paid subscribers could watch a premium episode legally with English subtitles roughly 1 hour after it hit the airwaves in Japan. The legal side didn't curb piracy with moral guilt or anti-theft advertisements. It beat a massive piece of the black market by copying its absolute best feature, convenience. At the same time, a younger, less technical generation was finding anime through the dumbest possible routes, YouTube. Now, I remember watching entire arcs in part.
Now, I ain't started watching stuff on YouTube till like 2014. That was after I got out of prison, so, you know, shouts out to that part of the game. I mean, 2008 to 2012, yeah. I had just started watching Naruto, but that was actually on Cartoon Network, so, see, that's how old I am.
Yo, you trying to watch a new Bleach? Yeah, but give me a second, I'm setting it up. But we're gonna watch it the right way. We're gonna watch it on YouTube. What? Easy. No, I downloaded the episode and I'm uploading it on YouTube in 3 parts. Why are we watching Bleach on YouTube? Because this is how I started watching it when it first dropped. It's not gonna hit the same unless I do this. I don't understand. I don't expect you to. Nah, you wouldn't get it. You don't. You wasn't in the trenches like us, man. You wasn't there.
We're talking part 1 of 10, part 2 of 10, tiny video in the middle of the screen, mirrored, weird borders, and sometimes pitched up audio. And then you would find that part 7 was missing. Or if you were unlucky, you would click the next part and get rickrolled.
Please, use man, love you. Alright, bet. Hey, yo, oh yeah, you want a rickroll? You want a rickroll?
For a lot of people, that was their first online anime library. Broken, cropped, or half missing, and somehow it was still better than nothing. Overall, this is the boring answer corporate PR teams never want to put on their poster. Crunchyroll proved that a huge chunk of piracy demand could be converted when the legal version matched the things that the fans actually valued: speed. The corporate boardroom forgot this exact lesson. They won the first battle of convenience and speed, and then they grew greedy. They started consolidating the markets, slicing up the libraries, and building corporate walls, unwittingly creating the exact digital environment that would cause a new hyper-industrialized wave of piracy to explode. Before these piracy streaming websites became the smooth, flawless, one-click machines that you all see today, they relied on a massive hidden network of cyberlockers and video hosts. See, the site that you were actually visiting, they weren't hosting a single file. They didn't have the data, they were just embedding videos from somewhere else. Mega Upload, Rapid Share, FileServe, FileSonic. These services formed the invisible plumbing of the entire internet. And that world had its own waiting room. You would click the link, type the captcha, then stare at the timer. 45 seconds. Then you will get the free download button that finally unlocks. And if it failed at 99, you would start all over again. And yes, it was annoying and it felt like eternity. Anime was not the only content moving through those digital pipes, but the illegal streaming sites used that exact corporate infrastructure to print money. Then, January 2012 happened. The United States Department of Justice would step in, completely shut down Mega Upload, seize their domains, and charge the founders with high-level copyright offenses. The entire file-sharing world went into immediate blind panic. Media outlets reported that at the time, competing giants like FileSonic and FileServe disabled their public sharing features overnight out of pure terror. That single moment showed how incredibly fragile the entire cyberlocker model actually was. For anime streaming sites that are completely dependent on those embedded links, it was an absolute tech blackout. Dead video players, missing episodes, broken links, and millions of users suddenly discovering that their free library was just a digital illusion held together by 3 mirrors and a prayer. So when the old cyberlocker model collapsed, the next winning platform did not need to create the demand. The demand was already there. It just had to make the hunt a lot easier, and by 2012, Kiss Anime did exactly that. 2010s were a glorious time. Supernatural, the TV show, was booming, and it was also the absolute golden age of pirate streaming. And the undisputed king of that landscape was a platform called Kiss Anime. Launched in 2012, Kiss Anime exploded to be one of the single largest anime piracy operations on the planet before it eventually collapsed under intense legal pressure. For millions of fans, this wasn't just some obscure back alley webpage, it was the front door. If you typed "watch Naruto online" or "watch One Piece episode" into Google, there it was, sitting at the top in its all beautiful glory of the search results. Kiss Anime mattered profoundly because it completely changed the user. Search, click, play. Well, actually, search, click, fight the website, then play. I mean, you didn't just press play. First you would click, then there was a pop-up, then there was a second click, another tab, third click. Now the episode actually starts. Sometimes you also got that hot singles in your area pop up. Kiss Anime was dodgy as hell sometimes, and it still felt easier than the illegal route. That was the seismic shift. Anime piracy stopped being a niche hobby for technically literate internet users and became a completely normalized viewing behavior for kids, students, broke fans, region-locked communities, and casual viewers who simply followed the path of least resistance. For a massive chunk of the global population across Brazil, India, the Philippines, Latin America, and parts of Europe, Kiss Anime was their very first anime catalog. Not because it was legal, and certainly not because it was safe, but because it was there and it was available. Kiss Anime proved that piracy had learned everything from legal platforms. It wasn't just a list of files anymore. It had browsing, it had search, categories, watch lists. It was anime as a service, except the service was completely illegal and occasionally looked like it might install unwanted web browser toolbar from 2008. So when Kiss Anime was permanently forced offline, millions of people treated it like a literal internet funeral. Forums filled with thousands of mourning posts. Twitter erupted with insider jokes. People who had grown up using the site talked about it like its demise was like a death of a childhood friend. For a lot of users, the memory is simple. You load the site and it was just gone. No episode, no homepage. I mean, some people said, "I thought my internet was broken at first." But if the industry thought that the death of Kiss Anime was a final victory, they had absolutely no idea what was brewing in the shadows. Out of the ashes of the old platform rose a brand new breed of pirate empires, sleeker, faster, built on highly optimized ultra-modern content delivery networks. The king of this high-tech era was a site called Aniwave, formerly known to millions of people as 9anime. Aniwave wasn't just some dodgy amateur webpage. It was a new digital superpower pulling in billions of global views and operating with the corporate efficiency of a Silicon Valley startup until the summer of 2024. In a massive, coordinated, multinational legal strike that sent shockwaves through the entire internet infrastructure, a coalition of Hollywood studios, Netflix, and Japan's Coda completely pulled the plug. Overnight, Aniwave, Anisearch, and a dozen sister streaming hubs vanished from the web. It was the single largest anime piracy purge in the history of anime. The operators didn't even fight back. They just left a single haunting message on the blank white screen, thanking the fans and telling them to use the legal streams. Shortly after, secondary platforms like Anime Kai experienced severe catastrophic server and hosting outages, leading directly to their absolute demise. Once again, the industry celebrated its total definitive victory. But the traffic again didn't just vanish. A lot of it moved into the next monster, Hi Anime. Hi Anime came from the same messy bloodline as Zoro and Aniwatch, and after Aniwave went down, it became one of the biggest anime piracy sites on the planet. At what point, Hi Anime reportedly pulled in 364 million visits in a single month. Not yearly, monthly. And the usual suspects were already circling. The MPA had linked Hi Anime back to Zoro and Annie Watch's bloodline. They suspected that the trail pointed towards Vietnam. The hosting location was hidden behind Cloudwave, and Ace had already been chasing. And then the US government officially put it on the notorious piracy markets list. So when Hi Anime suddenly went dark in March 2026, everyone started asking the obvious question. Was that it? Was Hi Anime actually dead? Or was it just another rebrand, another domain shuffle, another paint job on the same getaway car? Because the goodbye message looked final. No anime pirate king dragged into court, just a simple message across its domain, thanking users for the journey. Again, some anime fans treated it like a funeral.
Today, our worst fears have been confirmed. Hi Anime has officially shut down. Now, this shouldn't come as a total surprise because they have been quiet for nearly 80 days. But it is now official. All contact with the team has been lost and its major accounts and networks have disappeared.
Others immediately started hunting the next mirror, the next clone, the next official replacement that probably wasn't official at all. And that is the point. Different name, same behavior. The audience moves, the map changes, the hunt continues. By the late 2010s to 2020s, legal anime streaming had genuinely improved. Crunchyroll, Funimation, Netflix, Hulu, HiDive, Amazon, Disney, they did help make anime more available than it had ever been. Simulcast became normal. Major shows often reach international viewers quickly. Watching anime became legally possible in a way that simply had not been for earlier generations. Anime was now incredibly accessible, and as someone who went through a period of watching up to 6 series a week, yes, I know, that's madness, I genuinely now couldn't keep up with the sheer volume of new anime. New generations of anime viewers would then come into the fold. Anime was no longer a niche hobby, it was now a mass market item. But that's the point. Anime had become big enough for casual fans to flood in. And once anime became mainstream, the legal market started behaving like every other mainstream streamer market. Crowded, fragmented, and also very irritating. Sony would then complete its acquisition of Crunchyroll from AT&T in 2021 through Funimation Global Group for $1.175 billion in cash, bringing 2 major anime streaming brands under the same corporate roof. That helped consolidate some of the market, but consolidation did not magically make the shows available everywhere. Instead, it kicked off a massive monopoly arms race. Sony wanted to own everything anime related, but then they forgot the one thing. They can't conquer the laws of international copyright. Rights are still territorial, windows still vary, and other platforms still hold exclusives. So fans got a strange result. Anime was now more legal than ever, but the legal experience still felt incomplete. The old fansome argument was, we're translating what nobody gives us. The modern piracy argument became, we're collecting what legal services deliberately scattered. And that is a completely different moral claim. If one legal platform has season 1, another has the movie, the third has the new season, and your country gets none of it, people are really going to notice. And most importantly, they are going to notice if the illegal site has everything in one place. Again, that doesn't make piracy legal. It explains why the legal pitch fails. You cannot sell people a maze and then act shocked when they use a hole in the fence. Let's talk about region logs. Because if there's one thing that has done more free marketing for piracy than almost anything else, it's this phrase, not available in your region. Imagine being a fan in Brazil or Turkey or Argentina or parts of Africa or just anywhere the licensing treats like an afterthought with Wi-Fi. You pay for a subscription, you search for the show that everyone online is talking about, and the app says no. And it's not because the show doesn't exist, and it's definitely not because you are not willing to pay, and again, certainly not because the technology doesn't exist. but because the rights agreement has been decided that your country sits outside of the magic circle. From the industry's point of view, this makes total business sense. Rights are sold by territories, distributors make deals, platforms negotiate windows, lawyers exist, and sadly, lawyers must be fed. But from the fan point of view, it feels totally insane. The internet is global, yet some regions are being treated like second-class citizens. I've read constant complaints from fans around the world. I've paid and the show still isn't available here. So what's the point of paying if the pirate site has it and the app doesn't? Another reason fans distrust legal streams is the censorship. Now, this hasn't always been the platform's fault. Sometimes the censored version is the Japanese TV broadcast versions. Sometimes the uncensored version only appears later on Blu-ray. Sometimes different regions have different standards. And certainly, sometimes family-friendly banding gets involved. Unfortunately, none of this is ever explained to the customer, which is a brilliant way for your customers to assume the worst. Regardless of however you want to look at it, the result is always simple. Fans press play, they don't always know what version that they're getting, the blood is blurred, the nudity is covered, the violence is darkened, swearing softened, and scenes altered. Seriously, don't get me started on terraformers and their legendary black censorship. Whoever handled that must have been really in a hurry to get home or to a local bar for a drink. I mean, it put me off that show for half a decade until I got my hands on the Blu-ray versions. So you end up sitting there wondering if you're being gaslit into believing that half an orange is actually a full orange. It feels like a diabolical real-life genjutsu somehow, except this one just wants your wallet. For many older fans, this paranoia triggers massive generational trauma. We still remember the dark ages of the 4Kids dubs, an era where One Piece had Marines holding ridiculous water guns and Sanji's cigarettes was edited into a permanent lollipop. An era where nobody could actually die. Instead, characters were constantly getting sent to the Shadow Realm or blasted into the next dimension.
Maybe you won't be such a disappointment in the next dimension. Stop me, or you'll find yourselves in a new dimension.
They even took Sailor Moon and clumsily rewrote Uranus and Neptune as cousins just to erase their romantic relationship. Who knows, maybe we weren't ready for that cousin conversation as kids. Regardless, that history has damaged trust. Fans learned that the official version was not always the complete version. Again, the legal answer might be complicated, broadcast standards, ratings, licensing, masters, whatever, but the emotional result is not complicated. People feel cheated when they pay for a version that they believe is complete and ultimately turns out to be incomplete. Pirates are winning because they took the legal files, stripped away the friction, and placed them inside a service that often feels easier to use. So what do big companies do? They hit you with the guilt trip. Piracy hurts creators.
100年後も漫画やアニメは僕らを救ってくれるだろうか。
And look, on paper, we can say that some of it makes sense. Less money hurts, but to the modern fan, it feels totally hollow. Why? Because the anime industry is making record profit. And yet, the average 24-year-old animator in Tokyo is sleeping under their desk, working 18-hour days drawing these massive global fight scenes for literal crumbs. The cash flows through production committees, licensing corporations, and massive streaming monopolies before it ever hits the artist. Piracy drains money, sure, but a legal subscription somehow doesn't guarantee that the artist gets a decent life either. And that begs the question, if we can support the artists, why is it that the artists are the last people to get paid? So when the guilt trip fails, the corporations turn to brute force, and they are throwing serious money at it. Look at this map. Right here, the international police launched a massive sweep called Operation Animes. They didn't just send scary emails, I promise you. They coordinated across borders, froze bank accounts, and wiped out over 50 massive streaming hubs in one go. In Japan, they changed the law. hard jail time for downloading, and total bans on leaked sites. They are treating piracy like an illegal drug cartel, and not just a bunch of teenagers sharing files. And look, sometimes it actually works. The data shows that when a massive file sharing site gets completely obliterated, revenues being made by these legal streaming platforms temporarily increase. Despite the arrests, despite the site blocks, pirate demand is still rising alongside the legal market. Every single time a new show trends globally and drives record-leading sales, pirate traffic doesn't drop, it continues to explode. They're fighting essentially a ghost marketplace, a phantom economy, where billions of unauthorized views drive massive global hype, while the corporations see 0% of that cash itself. Because at the end of the day, convenience beats scolding every single time. So what's the actual takeaway here? If you look at the courtroom dramas and the website takedowns, the reality is remarkably simple. Anime piracy is not dying, it's just changing outfits. The industry has every legal right to fight piracy, but when it uses underpaid creators as a face of that fight, while its own platforms get worse, more expensive, and more fragmented, the moral pitch starts to rot. We are living through the absolute age of media enshittification. These platforms race to secure a near-total monopoly, and the second they accomplished that, they turned on their own customers. They hiked the subscription prices, they killed the free tiers, they casually deleted digital libraries that users thought they owned. And their new ultimate shortcut? They are now actively firing human translators and replacing them with broken automated AI subtitles that butcher the nuance of the story, all while demanding that you pay more for a degraded product. The legal industry has spent 2 decades asking the exact same defensive question: how do we stop piracy? This is a fraudulent question in my opinion. The real question they refuse to look in the eye is this: why does the illegal black market still feel like a flat out better product than the monopoly that people are actively trying to pay for? If you put a lock on a door, someone is going to try and pick it. But the real crisis happens when the corporate version is fragmented, a broken maze, while the pirate version gives you a flawless user experience. You cannot sue your way into a good product, just ask Nintendo. You cannot lecture a global audience into accepting higher prices for a much worse service, just wanting to connect with a culture that they love. They don't care about territorial licenses, windows, or corporate boardroom politics. They're just looking for the one thing that works, and they reward that door that opens, whether it's legal or pirate.
Of course, y'all know for more talk about, pirating and stealing things, because you already know, Spider Bart data book intro, the Spider-Verse is been. Shout out to that. The second one will be coming out soon. Y'all know to go ahead and I need to see at least 10 more people share that video out, and then I'll drop part 2. Hell, I can do all 4 parts before the brand new day comes out if y'all want. But y'all know how y'all gotta do. Y'all gotta support that first video so I can go ahead and have an incentive to drop them as fast as I've already got it ready. So I mean, if there's no demand, there's no demand. But if there is, we can keep them cracking real quickly. Because like they said, it's all about the speed.